Thank you for attending. We have a full house again. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Okay, Steve Chazanoff, who's an Air Force vet, is going to lead us in the pledge.
Good morning, everyone. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Steve.
Eli.
חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you. So guys, you should know that Eli, a lot of the merchandise that we bring over to the IDF, Eli is the wheelman. Howard? Guys, Motzi.
Hey, good morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
A couple of reminders. We're going to have a investment club meeting after this. Please attend here.
Guys, please.
Okay, Ron is going to introduce the new members. Ron?
Okay, just real quickly, I have name badges for 2 new members. Don't know if they're here. Ed Beskin. Anyone? Nope. Steve Oster.
He's not here. Now, do we have guests?
Okay, and we do have, I know we have guests, so would you guests please stand? Maybe just tell us your name, where you're from, anything else you'd like to share with us?
Reuven Cohen in Morristown, New Jersey.
Sounds Jewish. Okay. This guy's Israeli.
Yeah.
Stephen Kegler, Cherry Hill.
Cherry Hill.
Yeah, but originally, where in Israel?
Where?
Where in Israel?
I grew up in the kibbutz Manara, which destroyed completely, on the border of Lebanon.
I grew up in Jaffa, so I'm sure everybody.
Oh, okay. And the man in
I
red.
love that city, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Love that city.
Joe Cohen, Cherry Hill.
No Israel? No, not from Israel?
My cousin.
Dave?
David left, Cherry Hill.
Cherry Hill.
And the gentleman in the back?
Howard Collin, Berlin.
I'm in West Berlin. Hi, neighbor.
Oh, I'm sorry? Okay, Alan? This is a longtime member, Alan, and he has a program that he's involved in.
Okay, we've asked for a while if anybody is a stamp collector. Nobody seems to volunteer. I have a collection of Israeli first day cards. So if anybody is interested, let me know.
Couldn't hear you.
If anyone is interested in the Israeli stamp cards,
First day cards.
first aid.
First day issue.
And he's right at the table where you bought your 50/50. Thank you, Alan.
Okay.
All right, let's start the announcements. Mike? Science history trip.
Morning, gentlemen. We got 5 different things to talk about. On September 12th, we had a men's club trip to the Science History Institute in Philadelphia, and we had 19 people. Had a good time. How many people were there? Okay, how many people liked it? Excellent. So it's a well-kept secret. It's been there for decades. It's over near Independence Hall. Okay? They did a special thing for us. Guys, excuse me. They did a special thing for us. It's a huge museum, and they have a huge library, and they have many, many, many things that are extremely old. But they had a private showing for us. They brought out some very, very, very old books, and including one book which was published before Columbus came to America in the 1400s. Incredible. So I would urge you to go see that place sometime and sign up to get notification. Ed Stein, by the way, Ed, to get notification of their programs. It's some of it's pretty nerdy. My wife was in science, so I would go with her to the things. Sometimes I didn't know what the hell they're talking about.
Hey, just raise your hand, okay? So
Yeah.
Just a review, what we do at the pantry, if you're familiar with it, I know you've heard it before. A bunch of us volunteer there every other week. And we stock shelves, we make sets. They're doing, I forget how many families, I think close to 1,000 families off and on now that they're servicing. And even more so now because there was a large food pantry in Merchantville, which maybe you read about, that closed because they were clogging traffic in the streets there, and the residents obviously didn't appreciate that. We're one of the only food pantries that delivers food to people. And a lot of our volunteers are doing that. So that's something that you could volunteer for. You do have to be vetted. You have to be fingerprinted for that. The JCC or the JFCS pays for that. If you want to volunteer with the food pantry, come and see me afterwards. I'll set you up with a volunteer coordinator who handles all the vetting. There are certain positions like stocking shelves and so forth that don't require the fingerprinting and all the other things that go along with it. It's not a big deal. Obviously, a bunch of us have gone through the fingerprinting process and so forth, and obviously, unless you're a felon, it's not an issue. But come and see me afterwards. There's a few other programs that we're involved with the pantry. The deliveries do require the vetting because of direct contact with the recipients of the food, whereas working in the pantry itself does not require the vetting, but you do have to sign up and so forth and give them your details. Mike's been involved in purchasing certain items for the pantry that we can purchase through either Dollar General or Dollar Tree or any of the discount retailers. And we always need people to go out and shop for us. Obviously, we provide the money. The men's club's had a program where we're donating money to the pantry for things like detergent, toothpaste, so forth and so on. And we always need people to go out and shop. You know, if you put an hour in, you go to a Dollar General or two, you pick up some of these items, we can always use that help. So if you would like to do that, my suggestion is talk to Mike after the meeting. Other than that, Mike gave me an agenda here. The last two things. donations to the pantry. When you come here Sunday morning, if you can pick up a can or two or a box of pasta from your stock at home, or during the week purchase it and bring it in right over there. We stock it, and after the meeting we take it over to the pantry.
Nothing expired.
Nothing expired. Yeah, don't go through your shelves and find stuff that's been there for 10 years and bring it in. And we don't need olives and pimentos and that kind of stuff. When you pay for breakfast, it's $10. As you know, it's a bargain. If you feel you want to leave a couple dollars, that would be appreciated. That goes to the pantry. There's actually a column on those envelopes for pantry donations. Mike, did I cover it?
You've done good.
Thank you.
I told you it was 5 items. Item number 3, IDF purchases. I'll be brief on this, but there's a lot of new people here. Since 2018, we've been helping to purchase things for the IDF. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, the Army there is nothing like here. Here, a guy needs something, a sniper thing, underwear, insulated underwear, anything. They just tell the logistics officer in their unit and they get it, boom. In Israel, it doesn't work quite that way. Starting in 2018, we actually helped purchase 15 updated bulletproof vests. Well, that was high-end for us. And it turns out that Melitz and I were both in Israel at the time they were distributing them, so we actually saw it and it was very appreciated. All right, I've talked about that before. I'll move on to the next thing. So what we've been doing since October 7th is many people got called up to the IDF. Many, many, many people. So they have a shortage of things. So we have actually purchased things here that they can't easily buy there if we made monetary donations. So we've done lately tourniquets. And, you know, like the Leatherman multi-tools? A good version, just as good, but for a whole lot less money, and several types. We have to buy some of them that don't reflect light for tactical soldiers that don't want their positions to be given away. And buying them is okay. I mean, you know, we donate money, we buy them, and sometimes the best way to get it is through Amazon, and getting their tax-free status is a hassle, so we do that through the JCC. Now, how do they get there? You can't just ship them. You end up practically doubling the cost of what you get, and you have to go through customs. When we know of someone who's going to Israel, we have others here who have extra suitcases at home. God knows who doesn't, right? And we fill a suitcase up. They get on the plane, and we have a contact. They're going to be able to drop it off in Tel Aviv. And we've just done it recently. Eli, where are you? Eli?
In the back.
Stand up, please. Eli is our contact with El Al, which is the only airline that goes, and he's had some incredible stories. And we end up having pictures of people handing over full suitcases of the things that we purchased. You purchased, right? That go directly to soldiers. Thank you, Eli. And we're still doing collections, and I'm going to make this part quickly because it went out as an email about a month ago. You can either write a check. Sometimes the check will be made for things that we buy through Amazon. You'll make the check out to the JCC. We have directions what you put down for the notation. Another way would be is just write a check or cash and give it to our treasurer. That's things that we're purchasing, not through the JCC. The third way is if you have a required minimum distribution that you're going to be doing, and who in this room probably doesn't, and we've had 3 or 4 people do that, and we have the directions for that. And God knows when we're going to be finished supplying the needs of these people. It's getting horrible what's going on there. Of course, there's been successes, but we're not going to talk about that now. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is going to be the flag. How many saw all those U.S. flags out there for about 3 weeks? Okay, hands down. How many people helped do it? Well done, well done. Now Nelson Melitz is going to speak about that. Nelson?
I'm very proud of the South Jersey Men's Club and the Jewish War Veterans. For the third year in a row, we put out approximately 3,000 flags. Each flag represents the 2,977 people killed on 9/11/2001. If we didn't do it, it wouldn't be done. For those of you that raised your hands and when you passed by, what you said you passed by the JCC or you stopped at JCC and you saw those flags, it was impressive. And it was difficult to get those flags in. It hadn't rained here for a long time, and that soil was really, really hard. So I think it was Mike came up with the idea to bring his battery run drills, and some other people brought it. That helped.
The drills.
The drills, yeah, with a bit this long. And then the firefighters from Cherry Hill, the police from Cherry Hill and other areas came by with their 6-inch drills. 20-year-old walking around, bum, 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 putting holes in, made us look pretty bad. But at the same time, we did it. 3,000 flags, we put them in, we took them out. Thank you all. I'm proud to be a member of this club. Thank you. Oh, we have a brief video. Please go ahead, Brandy.
Just one. I'm sure I've said this before, but Nelson was the president of all the Jewish war veterans, and he is a combat veteran, a retired colonel from the United States Air Force.
No sound? Hey, you turned it off. So there's a problem.
Barry, is this your work? Yeah, that's.
Should mention who did this. Nelson.
Excuse me?
Might say who did this.
Oh, okay. What's the name of the guy that did that?
Barry Foreman.
Right here. Right here.
Oh, Barry?
Barry.
Barry Foreman. Thank you, Barry.
Raise your hand, please.
Okay. That's impressive. You think about it, about 5,000 cars pass by the JCC every day. A lot of them couldn't figure out what this was. A lot of people didn't know what this was for, but it made them think. And some people asked the question, 9/11, that's what it's for. We forget.
Some people roll down their windows and wave.
Yeah, so it was just that some people rolled down their windows and waved. When we were putting the flags down, some people honked their horn. But we made an impression, and they didn't forget.
Number 5. Okay, 9/11 was when the global jihad struck the United States. October 7th last year is when it struck again, similarly in Israel, with the cross-border attack from Gaza into the settlements and communities that bordered Gaza and Israel, right? Over 1,200 people were killed and more were captured. We're going to do something similar today. Today. We're going to put, just as we did 2,977 flags, one for each victim of 9/11, we're going to do one flag for each victim of October 7th. It's on now. Thank you. We're going to be doing that in conjunction with the Jewish War Vets again and the JCC. We're going to be joined with some JCC staff, including their executive director, Oded Krause, and he's invited Israeli families to join us. So when we were doing the 3,000 flags, we were looking for speed and efficiency. If you're able to stay when the meeting's over, if you're able to stay to help put in the Israeli flags, remember, this time we're going to have inclusion with the families from Israel that are going to help us, all right? Now, when we did the flags, we had to make sure we had it spaced out and picture the sidewalk. And you know, each cement block has a line separating each one. We put a flag about a foot into the grass along each line, And then we had enough that we did in the middle of each block, okay? This time, we're not sure if they got the last 600 flags delivered, so we're going to just do it on the lines. It's pretty easy.
Anymore, and I started to work in hospice palliative care. And I partly tell this story because I didn't know, since I was out of the country for 9 years, that New Jersey was working to pass this law called medical aid in dying. And it turned out in 2019, New Jersey was the 11th state in the US to pass the law. So it was kind of a surprise to me, and I started asking people, well, who's doing it? And I found out hardly anybody was doing it. So that was kind of the niche that created a place for me to think about aid in dying. I'm not sure why it's making these noises. So maybe I'm touching that. Okay. So you might think, why would an emergency doctor want to do medical aid in dying, and what is it anyway? And I just want to say that because I did spend most of my career as an emergency doctor, I saw a lot of really bad deaths, right? I saw people who came into the emergency room either with trauma or sudden illness or maybe chronic illness, but they weren't expecting to die that day, and neither were their families expecting them to die. And that was one of the most difficult jobs that I had, was talking to families and even talking to patients about what might happen to them. And as many people are aware, based on what happened in the pandemic, when so many people were hospitalized and their families couldn't be with them, there were a lot of people who died in the ICU or in the hospital without anyone around them who loved them, which is a pretty terrible way to die, in my opinion. So when I learned about medical aid in dying, I started to do some research, and Oregon has actually had this law for, I think, 24 years. And a bunch of the states, Oregon, Washington, California, they've been doing it for a lot longer than some of the newer states. So those were my mentors. So I really learned a lot about how this works. And I have to say that I feel so privileged to be part of this new frontier of medicine. And you know, when I was an emergency doctor, I started in 1984, emergency medicine was a brand new field. There were not very many emergency doctors either. So I was lucky to be on that wave, and now here we have another new wave of medicine. It's kind of amazing. So it might not sound like a cheery topic, but it's a pretty interesting one. Let me see. Okay, let's see if this will work. Do I have to stand here? There we go. Okay. So I might just throw this out. Anybody have any ideas about things that make, what would a good death be? What a weird combination or pairing of words, right? Yes?
A good death?
What's a good death?
I go to sleep tonight, and in the morning I don't wake up.
Exactly. Falling asleep and not waking up. Okay. What else is a good death?
Somebody else's.
What? What? Oh, somebody else's. Love that. Yes. Yes, having lived a good life. Okay. Yep.
Surrounded by family.
Surrounded by family. Yeah, these are pretty much what people do say if you ask them what's a good death. Right? So you got most of them, right? Die in my sleep, have family. And most people wouldn't want to be in a hospital with lots of equipment attached to them and people that they don't know. Okay. So, and I just want to say that I attended a medical aid in dying death yesterday from a lady who had appendix cancer for many years, and she hadn't even been able to eat for years. She was fed by intravenous TPN. And she finally decided her suffering was too great. She just couldn't go on with it anymore. She was weaker, she was in pain. And she had the opportunity to gather all the people. She spent several weeks actually saying goodbye to people. She said it was pretty surreal and pretty bittersweet, but you know, she had all of her mentation. So then she chose the people who were going to be present on her day. And it was interesting, she had her calendar, she had that day circled. She had her husband, her 2 boys, a niece, and 2 close friends that were there. And she basically planned her own Shiva. She had another friend who provided sandwiches, fruit, cookies, drinks to kind of sustain all of us through the vigil of being with her for the day. And you know, to her last minute, she was being thoughtful for others, which is kind of incredible. And I mean, I've seen this with people before. I had another lady who was a Jewish lady who said her last words to her family was something like, make sure they have horseradish on the trays. You know, she was worrying about her own shiva, right? Which, you know, it's kind of a crazy thing. Like, to think that you get to pick the day that you're going to die is kind of crazy, but it lets you plan. It lets you say goodbye to the people that you care about the most. It lets them say goodbye to you, which is huge, right? And people just don't die with as many loose ends. Now, this is not for everyone, I can tell you for sure. It's not for everyone. It's a small number of people that choose it. And frankly, you have to be pretty brave to make this decision. But none of my patients choose this because they actually want to die. Every one of my patients that's eligible and that chooses aid in dying chooses it because the alternative is too awful. They're either dying of a terrible disease or, and it's not usually pain, by the way. Outside people think, oh, they're in terrible pain. But it really has more to do with dignity and control. I have many people who say to me, I don't want to be bedbound and I don't want my adult children changing my diapers. I want to have them remember me on my last day, being able to say goodbye, I love you, and having that dignity and, you know, and respect from them. Okay, so I'm going to have to stand over here. Can you hear me if I talk loud?
You can move the microphone. No.
I can move the microphone? Oh, yeah. Ooh, how's that? That works. Okay. Okay. Okay, so this is a law in New Jersey, and so it's a legalized medical practice, and these are the key things. It's only available to terminally ill people who have a prognosis of less than 6 months. Sometimes that's easier than other times to determine. For people who have, you know, stage 4 cancer that's progressing, that's usually eligible. Sadly, I have a lot of patients with ALS and some of the neurodegenerative diseases, okay? And then there's also now people who have end-stage heart disease, end-stage kidney, end-stage liver, a lot of the same sort of diagnoses that people would go to hospice with. Main thing is they have to be able to consent to this process at several points along the process. And it does take a minimum of 16 days from the time that the patient speaks to their doctor. Yeah.
You have that full mental capacity to do
Full mental capacity. You have to be able to make your own medical decisions from the first day that you make the request till the day that you decide to take your aid in dying. So some people that I see start on day 1, right, when I either have a telemedicine or I visit them and they're fine, but then during the process of the 16 days, they have to speak to a second doctor, they have to speak to me again at day 15, and some people say, man, the minute I can get my hands on that medication, I'm taking it. But many people say, I just want to have this as an option, and then I stay in touch with them and monitor how they're doing. But if they get to the point that they lose their ability to consent or self-ingest, they can't do it. So it's got to be with their consent, understanding, be mentally capable, and able to self-ingest all the way. And then they do fall asleep and die peacefully. Okay, so as I mentioned, people think when they hear about aid in dying, they imagine people dying in agony, and that's why they might choose it. And sometimes that's true. But look, I was a hospice doc for a long time, and I really do believe in hospice, and most of the time hospice does a pretty good job with pain management. So that's rarely the only reason that people would choose this. Maintaining dignity, as I said, that's a huge thing. And this is what I've learned, and I've now been doing this since 2020, so I'm starting my 5th year of doing this. This is the personality type, people who want to be in control, okay? You figure that they're in a situation where this disease has taken all the control away from them, right? And this gives them one important way of taking control back, and that is so important to a lot of people. That said, you still have to be pretty brave to choose to do this, right? So that's the biggest question I get is, and by the way, in the news, they often refer to medical aid in dying as physician-assisted suicide, which makes me cringe every time, because it's not suicide, okay? Let me just go ahead here. Okay, and so these are some of the things that we basically talk about. The biggest difference, and believe me, greater minds than mine have looked at this philosophically, ethically, because aid in dying is only available to people who have a terminal illness with a prognosis of less than 6 months, they're essentially dying already. and they're making the decision to shorten their suffering and to have a different kind of end of life. As I said, perhaps the one where they're surrounded by people that they love and be able to be conscious, and as some of my patients have said, I want to still be me on the last day of life, okay? So it's not available to people with chronic disease, or it's not available to people with mental illness. It's got to be a really bona fide physiologic illness. And they're usually just choosing not to prolong a difficult and long dying process. The pros are, you get to have everybody there, you get to say goodbye, you're in control. How is that different from suicide? Now, what I say here is that it's usually not people with terminal illness, but I'll qualify and say I have had patients who have said to me, if this option wasn't available, I would blow my brains out. To which the spouse usually says, oh my God, thank God you didn't do that. So yes, there are people who feel desperate, and there's certainly people in states where aid in dying is not available, who might choose to die by suicide. But for the most part, the idea that you have of suicide as someone who dies alone, it's certainly not sanctioned or legal, and it's very traumatic for the family, right, as you can imagine. And they're doing a lot of research now, and I think certainly from the families I've seen, as sad as it is to say goodbye to someone on the day they die, I do think that people have somewhat less of a grief, an unresolved grief process, because they know that the person didn't suffer and they did get to say goodbye. So those are kind of some of the differences. These are the states that now have it. Just a little aside, so Delaware was trying really hard to get aid in dying passed, and just a couple months ago, the legislature finally passed it. And then they sent it to the governor, and he sat on it for a while. He had to approve or veto it, and I forgot his name now, Carney, I think? Carney, yeah. Anyway, he is leaving his office in November, and he came out this week and said, I personally don't believe in this, so I'm vetoing it. And they had, polled most of the residents in Delaware, 78% of whom were in favor of aid in dying, but he just put the kibosh on it, which is really sad. So they're not on the list yet. So these are some of the diseases, as I said, that people come to us with. And as I mentioned before, these are the eligibility requirements. So it's actually 3 verbal requests, but 2 verbal requests to me, the prescribing doctor, 1 to what's called the consulting doctor, which could be the patient's own physician, maybe their oncologist or neurologist or their family doc. And the interesting thing here is I spend a lot of my time on the phone speaking to potential consulting doctors for my patients, and I am still amazed 4 years into this at how many doctors in this state don't even know this is legal. I'll get the answer, what? You can do that in New Jersey? I'm like, yes, it is legal since 2019. But they don't know, so I have to educate them. And the role of the consulting doctor is actually pretty limited. The only thing they have to say is they can confirm who the patient is, right? They know their identity, that they do have a terminal illness with a prognosis of less than 6 months, and most importantly, that they feel they can make their own medical decisions. So the consulting doctor is not the one who's writing the prescription. That's the part that scares most of them, and that's the part that I'm doing. And the other thing is that I attend every death. Okay, I'm actually there with the patients. There's also a written request. I won't go into too many details, but it's a document that the patient signs, and it does require 2 witnesses. One can be a family member, one has to not be a family member. And sometimes this is tricky for people because they don't always want to tell people outside their very close family that they're considering this. And I recently became aware of the fact that there's something called a mobile notary. I didn't even know that existed. And you don't require a notary for this form, but it's okay to use one. And so some people will have a mobile notary come. The notary, again, is just saying that they see the patient sign the form. They're not saying that they agree or disagree with aid in dying. So that's the consulting. Okay. Now, in some states, actually now just Hawaii. Hawaii requires a mental health evaluation. All the other states, New Jersey included, if either doctor thinks the patient is unable to make their own decisions and they need like a capacity exam, you can request a mental health evaluation. This pretty rarely happens because I just feel like most of the time these people don't get too far in the process. But I do want to say, if somebody has something like well-controlled depression, or if they're depressed because they have a terminal illness, that doesn't exclude them from choosing aid in dying, as long as they really understand what they're asking for, okay? And we always say to patients they can change their mind until the time that they start to drink the medicine, although I'll tell you it rarely happens. Okay. Okay, so what, I don't remember where we, okay. So once we get to the point that all of those steps are done, so 2 requests with me, consulting doctor, written request, I review the records, et cetera. We come to day 16, that's when I can write the prescription. So it goes to the pharmacy, and the patient doesn't have to fill it. In fact, I don't want them to fill it unless they're pretty close to actually wanting to use it, but it becomes available from that date on, and that never expires. Okay, so, you know, if you, like I did have one gentleman who had leukemia, and it was a very quick onset, and he was told by his hematologist when I met him that he had 2 weeks to live, imagine. And first thing he did was he called me, he got all qualified, and then they put him in a trial, you know, a clinical trial, and he did well for like 10 months, which was great. But he said to me, I know that at some point this is going to stop working, and on that day, I'm going to call you. And that was what happened. So he got 10 good months out of it, and it was great. Okay, so people ask this question. Once people drink the medicine, they fall asleep in 5 to 10 minutes. And that's pretty reliable. I saw one guy go 20 minutes, but usually 5 to 10 minutes. And it's gentle. They're not in pain. They're not having trouble breathing. It's really oral anesthesia, right? So they drink the medicine, they start to get really sleepy, generally have their family around them, and they fall asleep. 80% of people die within 2 hours, and then I think it's 90% die within 5 hours. Of course, there's always 10% outliers who go longer, but nobody ever wakes up. So, you know, it's not painful or distressing for the patient, and the family gets to see them looking very, very peaceful until they finally die. So, and as I said, my practice is that either I or I have my partner Elizabeth, you saw her name on there. I also have another doctor who's now working with me. One of us, if not more than one, are always with the family. And we do that for a couple reasons. One is, it's interesting, the law was not written to say that you have to have a healthcare professional at the bedside, which as an emergency doctor, I think is terrifying. Like, I can't imagine that you're giving this prescription for lethal medicine to a family who's not trained and saying, hey, when you're ready, just take this medicine, right? No, it's not that simple. So when we go, we mix the medication, present it to the patient. And by the way, self-ingestion, some people say, do I have to mix it myself? No. I have patients who maybe can't use their hands, right? They're ALS. We can mix it, put a straw in it, put the straw in the person's mouth, as long as they suck it down, they're self-ingesting, okay? And then I take care of cleaning up the bottles and not leaving that for the family, because again, as an ER doc, I have nightmares about things like the 3-year-old would come over and see, you know, a glass with apple juice and think that it was fruit juice and drink it, or the dog would knock it over. So we're very safety oriented. And it frees up the family to just be there for emotional support. So that's my feeling. And my practice is the only one that has doctors attending. There are some other doctors in the state that do write the prescriptions. Some of them advise families to get a death doula. Have you heard of a death doula? So they're lay people who are trained in supporting families through death, but they're not medical people. So if there's any issues, they really can't handle that aspect. Some might have some individual nurses, but as I said, my feeling is this is too high stakes to trust this to someone who's not medical. Okay. Okay, so the difficulties are, well, as I said, lots of people don't even know about this. So now you all know about it, which is good. I'm always educating health professionals, like wherever I can get in there to tell people about this, because it really is important. There are only 3 pharmacies in the whole state, you can imagine. CVS, Rite Aid, and Walgreens don't want anything to do with this. These are all private compounding pharmacies who do a really good job in mixing the medicine, but it's a pretty big deal for them. They have to order powdered, concentrated medicines. There's 5 different medicines in this. They have to grind it really finely, and they obviously make it up to order, right? So it's not simple. And then, you know, finding someone who will help. If someone who doesn't know what they're doing is looking at this whole process, it's pretty daunting. But I mean, this is what I do all the time. At this point, the statistics in New Jersey are that there have been about 350 people who have used this process since it became legal, and I've been to 170 of them, so almost half. Yeah. So I won't go into too much detail except to say some people can't swallow. The way the law was written, the medicine cannot be administered intravenously. It's got to be using some route of the GI tract. So we do have ways of dealing with that, but again, the patient must participate in some way. Okay? Yeah, so a couple things people ask about. What does it say on the death certificate? It would say natural death. That's really important. It doesn't say anything about medical aid in dying. Certainly doesn't say suicide. And they also wrote into the law that life insurance policies cannot be affected, which I think is important to a lot of people. Also, it says in the law that no federal insurance can cover this process. So it's an out-of-pocket direct kind of a payment thing. Again, there's different models that people use in this state, but I don't deal with insurance at all. And this is completely voluntary. So I'd say when I call a potential consulting doctor, about 60% of the time they're willing to participate. Some are not. Many times that's because of their own religious beliefs. Sometimes they don't need to give me a reason. At least they know about it. But it's definitely a voluntary thing.
Excuse me for a minute.
Yeah.
Please turn your phones off.
Like the theater. Okay, so again, this is just me being an ER doc, okay? Things I would worry about if you didn't have a health professional. Sometimes people can have delayed time until death. Again, they don't wake up, they're not distressed, but I feel like if family was dealing with that alone, it would be pretty nerve-wracking for them if they were told that most people die within 2 to 5 hours, right? And again, I worry about people have to be very carefully evaluated for this to make sure they're not going to have vomiting, to make sure they can take the medicine orally. Like it's a medical practice. And then just to mention, this is the organization that we use, ACA MAID, which is our national database, and I'm very active with this organization. They have a hotline for physicians and medical people, and I'm the hotline doc once every 6 weeks, so I'm taking phone calls from people across the country about how to deal with different clinical situations. Okay, so now I'll talk about some Jewish stuff. Okay, you can put the lights on if you want. So there's an organization called Compassion and Choice and another one called Death with Dignity, and they've done all kinds of surveys across the country about what people think about medical aid in dying. And they found pretty consistently that people of all religions support this as individuals, okay? Now, my partner Elizabeth is actually a Catholic, and when I first approached her about working with me on this, I really thought she was going to have some second thoughts about it. But she was pretty wholeheartedly in because she used to be an ICU nurse, and she said, gosh, I saw so many people who suffered with terrible deaths that I do want to work with you on this. And she's done a lot of study into what the Catholic Church says and what the Pope says. Her takeaway is that the Pope doesn't think anybody should have to suffer more than they need to, but they're never going to come right out and say it's okay, right, for aid in dying. So I have a lot of problems sometimes with families who are Catholic, not generally the patient, right? The patients who decide on this are pretty certain that that's what they want, but if their families are opposed to it, it can sometimes take a lot of work for them to come around. I really think that probably most of my patients are Jewish, which is really interesting, right? I'm not sure what to make of that. Another interesting thing I've noticed is quite a number of my patients have been born outside the US. What does that say? I don't know. People who are not born in the US are more open to this idea? I'm not really sure. But yeah, it seems like the people that I mostly have dealt with, and as I said, there's many that are Jewish, don't seem to have too many religious qualms about it. So I have, as I mentioned before to Ed, been interviewed by Rabbi Address on Jewish sacred aging, talking about aid in dying. And in fact, he had a second podcast, which was an interview with the husband of one of my patients, talking about what it was like for them. And for the husband, how he took a while to come around to the idea, but ultimately felt that it was the best decision for his wife, who had a glioblastoma. So anyway, that's been kind of my experience with it. But we've had people of all religions, it's pretty interesting, who choose to participate in aid in dying. So, questions? Yeah.
Do you have to be a New Jersey resident?
Yes, a very good question. So I don't really promote medical tourism. However, I mean, this is a big deal, right? Look at the whole country and the whole issue about abortion. Why can you get certain medical care in one state, not in another? So New Jersey does have a residency requirement, and they're talking about eliminating it. Right now, Vermont and Oregon have lifted their residency requirements. Personally, I don't think it's that big a deal, and I'll tell you why. When they wrote the law, they said there's 3 ways you can prove residency in New Jersey. One is to get a driver's license, pretty hard to do, right? 2 is to show that you have like a tax document, like maybe you owned a house in New Jersey and you have real estate tax. But the 3rd one is voter registration. And it only takes about 2 weeks to get New Jersey voter registration. So for someone who's coming, and I've only had a handful of patients who do this. It hasn't been that often, but I have had a handful of people from, let's see here now, both Pennsylvania and New York who have come here. The difficulty is they need an address. So if they have a friend or a relative who says, oh yeah, sure, you can use my address and get your New Jersey voter registration, that's easy. But then they need a place to be to take the medicine. They cannot come here and go through the qualification process and then take their medicine back to the Poconos and take it there. Because if they do, then whoever's with them can be charged with homicide. Now, in my practice, it's not much of an issue because I'm present and I know where they are, right? But if for a doctor who's just writing the prescription and handing it off, that can be an issue if the medicine is taken across state lines. So this has been a big problem for people because sometimes they have a friend or a relative who says, oh, sure, you can use my address, but when they're asked, can I come die at your house? That might not be so easy. So there have been a couple of different things I've seen people do. I thought one of the more creative solutions was there was a family who had friends in New Jersey, and the friends said, we're going to give you our house for the week, and then that family sent the New Jersey family to an Airbnb, which was really nice, so they had their own place. Some people have gotten Airbnbs, which I always feel is a little bit shady, but it's not illegal. I don't ever want anybody to die in a hotel or a motel, because that is a big red flag, and it creates all kinds of legal problems and police involvement and ME involvement, so that's not a good solution. And it can't be in a public place, so they can't sit on a beach, or on a park bench. It's got to be in a private setting. Now, when you talk about things like assisted living or long-term care, it's not part of the law that you can't take the medicine in these facilities, but the individual facilities generally forbid it. I don't know any hospital in the state that will permit people to take aid in dying on their premises. Same thing with the inpatient hospices. There's actually one hospice in North Jersey that will allow people to take it on their premises, but not the one down here. And for assisted living, if it's the kind of thing where someone can close their door and that's their private space, then they can't be forbidden, right, for taking that medicine, and frankly, no one would know. But I have a couple people right now who are in nursing homes or rehabs. Their families literally have to transport them home on the day they take their aid in dying. So this is one of the reasons people coming from out of state, it's hard. Like if you can't be in your own space, right, you have to be somewhere else. That kind of negates some of the advantages of wanting to be in your own home with the people around you that you love. So it's difficult. Yeah.
So the nearby family is all supportive. And there's this honorary member of a family, a brother, a sister, a former spouse, who lives across the country, who finds out that this occurred. And it was never with their approval.
Well, they don't have to approve. So look, we talk,
But they can, in fact, disapprove at the level of the state's attorney general.
No, they can't.
If they have some interest in the person's well-being, they can disapprove to that
So
level.
I've never had that happen. The closest I had happen was there was one hospice that had a chaplain who was a priest. Now, hospice chaplains are meant to be non-denominational, right? They're meant to support the patient in whatever religion they believe in spirituality. But this particular, actually this happened twice, that there was a priest who disapproved, who actually tried to interfere and called Adult Protective Services on the family. But it didn't go anywhere because the patient was consenting. If the patient consents, that's the main thing. Mostly, look, I know my families really well, And we have a lot of discussions about what that day is going to look like. And if they think there are going to be troublemakers, don't tell them, don't let them attend. But another reason I should be there, because if I leave the family alone and somebody shows up and calls 911, who's going to protect the patient, right? If I'm there, I'm like, hey, I'm the prescribing doctor. I can stand up for them. Yeah.
Can you also be the pronouncing doctor?
Absolutely. That's what I do on site. I do the pronouncing and the death certificate right there. Yep. I'll go over here. Yeah.
Well, it's the actuary in me that's going to ask this question.
Yep.
Have there been cases where the death has occurred, we did everything according to the protocols, and the insurance company says, we're not paying the death money?
Never happened that I'm aware of. And I'm pretty sure I'd know because it's a pretty close-knit community. So, nope, don't think it's ever happened. What?
There's a 2-year period typically on a life insurance policy that if it's 2 years or later.
Right, but it's written into the law. Life insurance cannot be affected. Oh, he was saying that the life insurance company has a 2-year look-back period.
Well, typically, if somebody buys a life insurance policy and they either take their own life or to the best of my knowledge, have assisted deaths, it can't happen before 2 years of having the policy.
Okay, so as I said, every state in the U.S. has this written into the law. Life insurance cannot be affected. It's not considered suicide. That is written into the law. So, yeah, person in the back.
I have a question. My first wife was terminally ill, and she was on a ventilator, and she never wanted to be on a ventilator. And she gave her doctor permission for assisted suicide, and her doctors literally gave her IV medication because she couldn't swallow or anything. And she passed away very peacefully with my entire family. And it was, to be very honest, it was the nicest thing that could have ever been done to her.
So that's that's a tricky situation. That's not medical aid in dying. Okay, that could be under hospice. They might call that terminal sedation.
Yes, that's exactly what it was called.
But it's not the same thing because she wasn't able to consent at the moment.
She was able to consent. She was awake and alert.
Oh, she was?
Consented totally.
Okay. But she couldn't self-administer, I guess.
Correct.
Right, so that wouldn't fall under medical aid in dying. Right, yeah.
You've mentioned hospice a couple of times. What is the interact? I imagine that most or a large percentage of your patients are getting hospice.
Yes.
What kind of interaction is there between the hospice people?
Yeah.
Or do they recommend, will they make patients aware of this possibility? Will they wait for the patient to?
Yeah, it's a pretty tricky thing. So first of all, I'm very pro-hospice. I was a hospice doc. I still act as a hospice doctor. But it's tricky because hospices are not going to go out on the first visit with a patient and say, hey, by the way, did you know we have this option? They don't say that, okay? Maybe someday they will, but they don't. So they wait for patients to say something like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to have to go through this for weeks. Isn't there anything you can do? If you have an educated nurse or social worker, that's their trigger to say, well, by the way, did you know New Jersey has medical aid in dying? Now, with that, many people back right off, right? Because it's kind of scary. They don't really mean it. But a small number of people will say, oh, really? Tell me more. And that's when they often will give out information about aid in dying. I spend a lot of my time giving talks to hospices and medical groups to try to make people aware of it. The problem is the hospices have such a turnover now in their staff that I have to re-educate them every 2 years or so because their staff turns over. And like you might imagine, some staff is really positive about it and others don't even want to touch it. So many patients have said to me, oh, it's taken me so long to find you. I've asked like 5 or 6 different people, in the hospital, in hospice, till I finally got somebody to tell me about it. So it's still a little under the radar. It's tough. But I do, once I have a patient and I'm sort of co-managing them with hospice, usually they're pretty agreeable to that. And for those patients, they basically have me as a consultant to their hospice, which I think is helpful. I help a lot with pain management, symptom management. There are a couple of hospices in New Jersey that are pretty hostile to aid in dying. Many of them are coming around to it, but I've had 1 or 2 who have literally discharged their patients when they found out they were going to do aid in dying. And I mean, market forces, the way they are, they're going to miss out on referrals is what's going to happen because it is starting to be better known. But there's a couple. I mean, I know who the ones are who are most maid friendly and who are not. at this point, so, yeah, back here.
What do you charge?
You have to ask that question? Okay. So, it is a cash-only business. I'm going to tell you what my charge is, but I'm also going to say there are people who can't manage it, and we do work with people. We charge $6,000 for our care, which is literally from the first time that I speak with the patient. I actually don't charge for consultation and first request, all the way through whether I'm taking care of them for 16 days or 10 months. And that includes the day that I attend. And then the medicine is actually close to $1,000. So, I mean, and that might seem like a lot, but look at what funeral homes charge, you know? So yeah.
How did the New Jersey law migrate into oral medication as compared to an intravenous medication?
So every state in the US only permits oral, okay? Now Canada, interestingly, allows the option of oral or IV. Technically speaking, if another person administers medicine, that's euthanasia. That's not medical aid in dying, okay? And I think, again, I wasn't one of the people who made the law, but I think the idea of oral was to be sure that it was with the person's consent, right? So that you didn't have other people coming in and just pushing a syringe. People sometimes say to me, well, if you have such a great combination of medicine, why don't they use that on death row, okay? Not in favor of the death penalty, but if you walked up with a cup of juice to an inmate and said, here, drink this, of course they're not going to drink it, right? You could put the straw in their mouth, they're not going to drink it. So it's this idea about intention is why they use the oral medicine. But in Switzerland, there's two very famous organizations. One's called Dignitas, one is Pegasus, and I believe they also have the option of oral versus IV. But in the United States, no IV is permitted. So, yep.
You mentioned possibly using it for people on death row. Is the same medicine used? Calling it medicine.
Is it? No, it's not the same medicine.
Okay.
Because they never asked us what the right medicine is, so we're not telling them.
I have another question.
Yeah.
How do we know it's not painful?
Well, I only know from observation, okay? I mean, again, I'm a hospice doctor, and I'm trained to observe people being in distress. And I can tell you that when they drink this medicine, they close their eyes, they look very peaceful, and they basically just go into a deep, deep sleep and ultimately anesthesia. I don't see the signs that I see in other hospice patients who are not medicated like this, who look like they're distressed. You can look at facial grimacing, you can look at body language, right? You can tell when someone's in distress. You can certainly see when they're having trouble breathing. I don't see that stuff. So by observation, yep.
So has there been any thought or investigating in mechanisms that allow the patients to initiate an IV injection themselves?
Well, it's not legal to give it IV in this country, so I don't think there's been any.
Is that because there was a fear that they would involuntarily be?
I suspect that's so. Again, I wasn't part of the decision making, but I think that's probably the reason.
But clearly, you could have the IV put in by a medical person, but have the injection initiated by the patient.
Right, but what if they didn't? You know, what if somebody wants to knock off grandma, right? I don't know. That's the argument, at least, that's given, but it's not permitted to be IV.
Because you could probably force someone to ingest it also.
Well, you can't do that with me because I'll be there watching. So they're not going to get forced. Yeah.
Is it ever a challenge to get a patient out of the hospital? So often you have that requirements to release you.
No, I mean, you're not a prisoner. So families say to the social worker, please arrange transport. And that family may have to pay for the transport home. But, I mean, they're not holding people there as prisoners. So, yeah, you can get somebody out of the hospital pretty easily. I haven't run into any issues with it.
Because sometimes the temperature has to be...
Well, those things are only true if you're not going home to die. Right? Yeah. Wait, let me come over here. Yeah, this gentleman? Yeah.
What are other medications?
Okay, so for those who are not medical, you won't know what I'm talking about, but for those who might be, these are such large doses that when I was an ER doc, if I ever heard somebody took this formula, I would just think they would be dead in 10 minutes. So we use morphine, And just to give you an idea, a typical dose of morphine is like 5 milligrams. We use 15 grams, okay? We use Valium. Again, typical dose might be 10 milligrams. We use 1 to 2 grams based on the patient's history. We use phenobarbital, which is a sedative anti-seizure medicine. We use 5 to 10 grams. So those three put people to sleep really quickly. And they should hopefully suppress respirations once someone's asleep. Then we have 2 more medicines, which are heart medicines, which are designed to kick in a few hours later if people don't get enough respiratory suppression when they're deeply, deeply asleep. Those medicines are digoxin and amitriptyline, and they're meant to cause dysrhythmias. And this formula has changed over the years. Years ago, in Oregon, they used secobarbital. You might see movies where you see people opening capsules and dumping the powder into a glass. That was the original thing. Then they went to pentobarbital. Then those medicines became unavailable in the US. So about maybe 7 years ago, a couple of people from the medical aid and dying community, an anesthesiologist, an ER doc, sat down and said, let's figure out a better formula. And since then, it's been tweaked a bit. But the formula that I just mentioned is what most of us use. And again, we individualize it a little bit based on the patient's history. Yeah, let me come back here.
I'm just curious, if you had a family member who did not attend, they demanded an autopsy, and the autopsy shows that they didn't die naturally, is the doctor essentially falsifying the death certificate?
No, because I mean, remember, I submit paperwork to the state for every patient. I'm not just like some rogue person prescribing. On the back end of what I'm doing, every patient who partakes of aid in dying, I have to submit 11 pages to the state, okay, with details of when I did all the requests, what their medical history was, what exactly was prescribed. And in fact, when the pharmacy dispenses that, they report to the state. So this all gets matched up. So I mean, it's all within the statute, right? The whole idea is this is legal. Yep, I wouldn't be worried about it. Yeah.
Does the medicine affect the entire body to the extent that they could not be an organ donor?
Yes. Well, I mean, there's been some debate about that. Certain things like bone or corneas might be able to be donated, but I don't think it's been done pretty much because they don't really know about tissue perfusion. Certainly not heart, lungs, liver, anything like that. Yeah.
You mentioned that certain people who are interested in
Louder.
You mentioned that certain people had a hard time finding a practice that would participate in this. I just Googled medical aid and dying. The first thing that came up top was nj.gov medical aid and dying.
Right. It's hard. I mean, I'm finally Googleable on the first page, but see, there's 2 big organizations, and they dominate like the Google world. One is Compassion and Choice. They're not clinical, though. They're the organization that goes in and gets the legislation passed, right? They go and lobby in all the state, governments. And then the other one is Death with Dignity out of Oregon, and they also do that. So finding me as an individual practice, it's starting to be, like now I can look at my Google web pages and I'm getting a lot more hits, but it's taken a long time. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Yeah. Bye.
Okay, 50-50. Wait, don't leave. 50-50.
Okay.
Don't leave.
Don't leave. Okay.
I pulled the number.
Am I pulling the number? Oh, cool. Okay. With a good shake. All right. It's pretty exciting here, guys. Oh, I read it out? All right. Here's the big number. You ready? All right. 265-085. 265-085. And the man in the back. It's not wearing a regulation shirt, though. That's good. We'll come back.
Before we leave, if anyone wants to help with the mounting of the Israeli flags here, please, where is Mike Perloff? Mike's right here. Please come over to Mike's table. The other thing is a reminder of we collect books, eyeglasses, and food for our food pantry. If you have something, if you don't, please remember next time. And next meeting, we're going to have someone, I'm sorry, yes. Next meeting, we're going to have the head of a Zionist organization from Washington, D.C. His name is Pollock, and he will be our guest speaker. And lastly, there is a meeting of the investment club immediately following. Wherever Abe will be sitting, you can head in that direction. Guys, thanks for coming. Have a Roshana Tova. Have a happy and a healthy New Year.